Okay, so in the last video lecture, we finally got an argument for Aristotle's definition of happiness, his understanding of what happiness is. And again, he thinks that this is a better account of what happiness is than the simpler accounts that are sometimes given by people who say that happiness just is pleasure or just is wealth and so on. And for the remainder of book one, Aristotle shifts gears to talk through some other questions that we can have about happiness. And probably the main one of these is the question of whether happiness is acquired by learning or habituation or some other kind of training, or rather comes about by what he calls divine providence or by chance. And another way of posing this question is the happiness of a person primarily a result of something that person has done, or is their happiness primarily a result of good fortune, good things happening to them? And so at this point, I would encourage you to just actually pause the video for a moment and ask yourself two questions. One, what do I think the answer is? But also, two, what do I think Aristotle thinks the answer is based on your reading of the text? What do you think Aristotle says in answer to this question? Okay, I can give you the answer. His answer is a little bit of both. Okay, it's a little bit complicated, but basically the answer can be summarized as it's mostly by things that we do. So a person's happiness is mostly dependent on their own actions, but chance is part of a person's happiness in some ways that I'll say more about in just a moment. So there are really just three arguments here I want to emphasize that Aristotle gives for why we should think about our happiness as mostly a result of our own actions, though external circumstances or fortune play a role in it to some extent. So the first argument is that he's already defined happiness as an activity. Remember, happiness is an active life of the element that has a rational principle, okay? Or it's doing a good job of living a rational animal life, where we're understanding that living as an activity. So since happiness is something that people essentially are performing or are doing, then their actions are particularly important to the question of whether or not they are happy. However, notice that some activities or some aspects of activities require the cooperation of the external world in order for those activities to be carried out. So a person, for instance, if part of happiness is having good relationships with other people, being a good friend to other people, if that's part of happiness, having good friends and being a good friend, then if there are no people around that are candidates for good friends because all of the people around, it just so happens for, say, an individual person, that all of the people around are corrupt and untrustworthy and so on, then that's going to make it impossible for that person to carry out the actions that are a part of a happy life as far as friendship is concerned. Okay. We'll maybe see some more examples of that as we move further into the text. A second argument he gives is that he says that a person who is virtuous, that is, who is behaving in the right kinds of ways to make a person happy. Okay, we're going to see more about what he means by virtue very soon, but basically a person who's taking all of the actions that they can take that generally lead to a happy life, that person will never fall below a certain level of misery. So no matter how bad things get externally, and no matter, you can imagine a person who themselves does all the right things, they're honest and they work hard and they try to think about what's the best thing to do and they do it and so on. They, pay attention to their own health, for instance. They're careful about their finances. They're generous and they try to build good relationships with other people. So these would all be kinds of patterns of life that would fit with an Aristotelian idea of a happy life. So imagine a person is carrying out all of those actions themselves. They're doing all the right things. But nonetheless, even though they're doing all those things, they just experience severe misfortune. For instance, the economy takes a downturn and they lose all of their investments. Their children, who they cared very carefully for, die in a terrible accident. Okay, you just imagine all kinds of bad misfortunes happening to this person. So Aristotle says, okay, those bad things will make it so that a person can't be as happy as they could be. All right, they will interfere with that person's overall happiness. But if a person always tries to do the right thing and they are themselves personally taking the right actions, then they'll never fall below a certain minimum level of misery. And he actually compares them to a captain in like a battle or on a captain of a ship. And he says that even when if such a captain, even when things are going very, very badly, still does their best to lead the troops or to lead the ship, then in a way that's still a successful captain or a successful general. And that's the way that it is for a person who lives a virtuous life despite great misfortunes. A person who does the right things to live a happy life, even when the universe is treating them very badly, so to speak. Just the chance events and external circumstances have not worked out in their favor, but they nonetheless were doing the right thing. That such a person could still be called happy at a basic level. And then the third argument that I want to point to is a little bit peculiar, but it basically goes like this. So if we treat happiness as dependent on fortune, if we say that people are happy primarily as a kind of accident, as a result of chance or because of the whim of some god, that is divine providence, okay, then it seems like we'd have to say that their happiness could just change with fortune, and fortune can change very quickly, right? So things can be good one week and bad the next week and so on. And then that would mean that people's happiness was unstable, that it would just vary like that according to external circumstances. But that seems weird because we want to say that, or we've already said that happiness is the chief good. It's a really, really good thing. And remember, according to Aristotle's cosmology, things are better when they're more stable. And so if happiness is the chief good, then it needs to be something relatively stable. It can't be something that just changes from week to week. And so it's better for us to say that happiness is dependent on learning, habituation, and what he'll very soon call character. That is, these kinds of general patterns of behavior that we develop through training and through practice. If we say that our happiness is dependent on those things, then it makes happiness itself something more stable than if we say that happiness is something that depends on external circumstance. So again, a little bit of an unusual and weird argument, and you might have some objections to it, but that is part of the reasoning that Aristotle gives for why we should say that happiness depends more on what we do, that is our own practice and training and our continued actions in accordance with that practice and training, than it does with external circumstances.